Okay, let's take a look at the cross section of the spinal cord model. Cross section of the spinal cord model. So remember, a cross section is when you're going to have top and bottom. So it's due from a transverse cut. So we're going to cut the spinal cord. And we're going to have a top part and a bottom part. There is a video that goes along with this. Now, one of the issues with the spinal cord model is we have 3 different cross sections of the spinal cord model. So we're going to look at the blue. You can kind of see the blue in the background there. We're going to look at this blue one first. We're about 4 pages in on the labeling handout. So again, there's 3 models, model 1, model 2, and model 3, and you've got labeling for each of those 3. So I'm going to go over this first one with you guys, and then y'all can just go through the PowerPoint and take a look and label model 2 and model 3 on your own. Again, just follow the PowerPoint through. So some of them have a few different structures. This one pretty much has all of them. That's why I like to use this one as a starting place. So when we're looking at the spinal cord, just to kind of get a big overview of what we're looking at here, this piece here is the spinal cord. So I know there's a lot of extra stuff on this model besides just the spinal cord. This area here that sits outside of the spinal cord, this is all called meninges. Meninges include layers of connective tissue and the spaces between them. So you've got 3 meningeal layers and 3 spaces that we're going to be naming. Now, as far as the structures that are coming off of that area there that are going to be going out of the intervertebral foramen, we have the dorsal root and we have the ventral root. So if you know your directional terms, remember dorsal is going to be towards the back, ventral is going to be towards the front. Keep in mind, we're looking at a top-down view of the spinal cord. Now, where the dorsal root and the ventral root converge, and I'm going to ask this on this side of the model because you can see those roots converging, which is nervous tissue in there, that is the spinal nerve, the spinal nerve. Okay, so now starting the labeling. So remember our spinal cord, which is made up of white matter on the outside, gray matter on the inside. So this is all white matter here. And then that gray matter is kind of looks like it's in the shape of like a butterfly or something like that. So this is all gray matter. Gray matter is divided into what's called horns. So this right here, along with this one, okay, those horns are called your ventral horns, ventral horns. This little bump right here that's coming off the lateral side of the gray matter, that is called the lateral horn. Now you have another lateral horn right over here. I only labeled one side, but there's the other lateral horn. And then letter C, you can kind of probably guess, is the dorsal horn. Again, I only labeled one side, but here's the dorsal horn on the other side of the gray matter. Now the white matter, which sits on the outside of the gray matter, the white matter is divided into columns. So again, knowing your terms that mean front and back, the back is referred to as the posterior column. So all of this right here is that posterior column, okay? Now, this is the lateral column. So all of this is lateral column of white matter. Here's the other lateral column of white matter. And then this is all anterior column of white matter. There's a little divot right there in the middle, but we're not going to name that. The hole in the center of the gray matter is called the central canal. Now, this is where you're going to have cerebral spinal fluid run through. Where the 2 roots converge, that is your spinal nerve. So here's your spinal nerve right here on this one as well. But I'm going to label it for testing purposes on this side because, again, you can see better what I'm pointing to. So the question, you're going to have to read the question. The question on the test is going to be name this area or name this structure, be specific. So I'm only labeling the bulge and I'm only going to be labeling it on this side. Notice you can't really see the bulge over here. So I'm only going to be labeling it on this side. And that bulge is called the dorsal root ganglion. Keep in mind, you have got sensory neurons coming in. And remember where you've got cell bodies of neurons, that's going to be called a ganglion if they're in the peripheral nervous system. Keep in mind, the spinal cord is your central nervous system. So this is your central nervous system right here. Everything else, all of this is all peripheral nervous system. So that dorsal root ganglia, that collection of cell bodies, is in the peripheral nervous system. Now let's talk about the layers. So this outermost layer of the spinal cord, very, very tough, is called the dura mater. Now I am pointing to everything that's this blue color, okay? Dura means tough, mater means mother, so it translates to tough mother. It is very tough. No, it's not as tough as the sclera on the eye. It is pretty tough. You're not going to be able just to tear this apart. The gray layer that I'm pointing to just beneath the blue is called the arachnoid mater. So it's all of this gray that goes all around, all of this gray right here. You can see it right here, all of this gray. That is all arachnoid mater. And it's called that because it kind of does look like a bit of a spidery web. Okay, now the layer that is touching the spinal cord itself. So remember that whole round circle there, that is the spinal cord. So this layer right here that is touching the spinal cord is called the pia mater. So if I tag the spinal cord on the side and say name the layer, that would be pia mater. Now the pia mater looks kind of like a thin piece of saran wrap that is stuck to the surface of the spinal cord. So you're not going to really be able to tear that off of there. Very, very delicate. We're not going to worry about dorsal ramus. Okay, letter N is pointing to this entire structure. So that would be the dorsal root. So if I say name the specific structure, that's going to be dorsal root ganglion. If I say name the entire structure, that's going to be dorsal root. So be careful on the wording of that question. This structure here, if that was the dorsal root, this is going to be the ventral root. And again, I'm going to ask the roots on that side over there that they're currently being labeled on, not where you can actually see the nervous tissue on the inside, okay? Don't worry about ventral ramus. We're not going to worry about that. Okay, so the space. You may be wondering, what the heck am I pointing to? There's nothing there. That's the model. That's the board that the model is sitting on. All of this space that sits on top of the dura mater. Remember, the blue is the dura mater. So everything above the dura mater is going to be the epidural space. Remember, epi means on top of. So yes, this is the place where if anybody's had an epidural injection, the fluid is injected in this epidural space. So it doesn't actually penetrate the meninges. And that's a big key for having an epidural, is it stays outside of the meningeal layers. Now this space right here between the blue and the gray matter, it's more of a not a true space. It's this. So the question on the test would be name the space between the blue and the gray. It's just this thin space. That is called the subdural space. It's the area just sits just beneath the space that sits just beneath of the dura mater. But I'm not pointing to the gray. I'm pointing to the place between the blue and the gray. Now all of this space here, this is subarachnoid space. Now, some people get a little confused when we're labeling this. It's all of this area all in here, all of this area. So anywhere, the area between the pia mater and the dura mater, that is, so here's your pia mater. Remember, it's touching the surface of the spinal cord. That's your pia mater. And then your dura mater is this gray layer right here. So everything between is going to be your subarachnoid space. And yes, that's the largest space we have, and that's full of cerebral spinal fluid. Now, I'm going to have you do the next two models on your own. I'm just going to kind of show you here. This is this model. It's called the spinal cord model number 2 as far as the labeling purposes go. And I've got all of it labeled. So it's the same stuff that we just learned. The only difference on this model is you can see there's no meningeal layers here. So we're just looking at the spinal cord. Now, this model here, spinal cord model number 3, not only has the spinal cord, which is right here, it also has the meningeal layers, but it also has, you can see this is sitting in a cervical vertebra. How do you know it's a cervical vertebra? Well, it's got transverse foramen in the transverse processes. And you can kind of see by this little structure right here on the spinous process that makes it a cervical vertebra. So you kind of see the spinal cord sitting within the vertebral foramen of the spinal cord, which makes it kind of interesting. But again, all of this is gone through and labeled for you, so that way you can start labeling everything on your own. So I'm going to have you guys do those 2 models on your own. And that's going to conclude the